Hello, everyone. As we have global audience, good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, depending on your time zone. Great to have you in our SAP community YouTube stream today. Sustainability with SAP is a new topic category that we would like to bring up to the attention of the SAP community, and the webcast today is the next episode in this category. Today, we would like to talk about SAP Sustainability Data Exchange, a solution for collaborative carbon data management. Our speakers are Nitin Jain, who is General Manager and co-founder of Green Token by SAP, and Tim van Kerkhoff, Business Solution Architect at SAP Innovative Business Solutions. We are grateful to have them as dedicated experts for the session today. My name is Larissa Brinkman from the SAP Global User Groups organization, and I'm your host. Before handing over to our speakers, let me share a few housekeeping rules. We kindly ask you to post your questions via live chat, and we will answer them at the end of the presentation. To post your question, you need to sign up with your YouTube or SAP community account. The additional materials of this session, like PDF, will be available under the same link in the description to the video of today's session shortly after the stream is finished. With this, I wish you great interaction and kindly ask Tim to take over.
All right. Thank you very much. I think we'll start with Nitin.
Yeah. Thank you, Larissa. Thank you, Tim. Hello, everyone. Greetings of the day. My name is Nitin. I'm the General Manager for SAP Sustainability Data Exchange and also SAP Green Token, which Larissa mentioned earlier. In this presentation, I'm joined by Tim van Kerkhoff, who is the Product Manager for SDX. Also, two of my colleagues, Larissa S, who is the subject matter expert, and David, who is the lead architect for SDX, is going to be there on the chat, and they'll try to answer your questions as they come on the chat. We can take the questions then, and we can also take the questions when we finish our presentation. So Tim and I can answer those questions there as well. If you can go to the next one, Tim.
Yep.
All right, this is the usual disclaimer. All right, so let's get started. The agenda that we have in mind for today is to talk a little bit about, why we built SDX in the first place. What are the challenges that we see in the market, which prompted us to build a solution like this? Then we'll talk more about what exactly is SDX. How does it work? We want to give you a live demo, so not just the slides, but actually we want to show you the real system. And then we also want to talk a little bit about, what is SAP's role in the whole sustainability and data sharing space. We plan to complete our presentation and demo in first 40 minutes or so, and then leave the last 20 minutes for any Q&A. Next one, please. All right, let's get started. So in the last few years, there has been a growing realization globally about the connection between the climate action and business performance. And hence you will see more and more companies are making public commitments towards net zero operation. As per one of the reports from Accenture, about 34% of the major companies have made such commitment already. And again, the number must have gone even higher up since this report was published. But ironically, 93% of these companies are expected to fail in their commitments if they don't increase the effort significantly from here onwards. When we hear about the climate action, the first thought is, how do you make your own operations more efficient? But in order to progress on the decarbonization agenda, there is a need to go beyond company boundaries and involve stakeholders from across the value chain and business ecosystems who sort of, to tackle the largest contributors of the total emission. In fact, Scope 3 emission, which is essentially the emission that you inherit by the virtue of buying the product and services from your supplier, and also how your own products get used, are the largest constituent of any company's total carbon footprint. As per this study from Deloitte, this number could be more than 70% of your total emissions. And of course, this number varies differently, varies by industry and the business model. In some cases, like in the automotive industry, this number could be even in the high 90s. So it's fair to say that in the journey of decarbonization, the first step really is to understand the product carbon footprint values across the value chain, how they're coming from your suppliers for the product, the raw material that you're buying, and so on. And this, when you have to go beyond the boundaries of your own organization, getting this data is often not very simple because you're working with large number of suppliers. For instance, in the case of an auto company, you will typically have more than 250 tier 1 suppliers, the suppliers that you work with directly. And if you go to multiple tiers, this number could be multiple tens of thousands. So you have large number of suppliers that you have to work with, and getting this data is not easy. If you go to the next one, Tim. So at SAP, we looked at this, these challenges. We realized that companies, they want to become more efficient, and scope 3 is the biggest source of footprint. So that information has to be collected. So what are the challenges that we see today, with respect to getting this data? Uh, measuring this PCF value accurately, for scope 3 is the cornerstone of getting to net zero. Now, the data collection is the biggest problem here. In absence of a solution like XDX, companies would typically rely on periodic emails, usually on a monthly or a quarterly basis, asking their suppliers to upload the data on a shared portal. Now, as you can imagine, this is super onerous and not scalable. Hence, the easy fallback for most of the companies is to rely on some third-party databases. Now, the problem with that approach is that you are not able to differentiate between efficient supplier and not so efficient supplier. So as a buying organization, you obviously cannot direct your purchases towards a more efficient supplier because you really cannot differentiate, which also means there is, no incentive for your suppliers to really become more efficient. So data collection is a problem, which leads to more problem of people not willing to invest in making the processes more efficient. The other challenge is the standardization. So even if you get the data, but if that data is not standard and not comparable, how do you compare, apples to oranges? How do you differentiate between a good and not so good supplier? And last, of course, is the challenge of trust. So you see a lot of companies, a lot of news around greenwashing. So when you get the data, how do you know that the data is correct, and it is not being greenwashed? How do you analyze the data that you receive to, and get some hotspots and places that you need to sort of double click and find out more information about, why somebody is giving the numbers that they are giving. So these are typical challenges in the world without SDX. Looking at this, looking at these challenges and trying to help our customers to become more efficient, reduce their overall carbon footprint. That's why we came up with the solution for SDX, a solution called SDX. If you go to the next one, Tim. And we are not alone. So there are multiple consortiums out there trying to achieve the similar objective. Some of the prominent ones we have put here on the slide. For example, the World Business Council for Sustainable Development, or in short, WBCSD, which is a industry agnostic consortium of companies. You have Katina-X, which is a consortium primarily focusing on the automotive companies. You have Together for Sustainability, which is meant for chemical companies. And there are other like battery alliances and so on. Now, SAP has been a member of many of these consortiums, active contributors, founding member of some of these consortiums. And then we believe that this is a team sport. We recognize that there is a value in these companies collaborating with their partners and their other organizations in their industry. And that's why a solution like SDX would be useful for all these organizations. So the next question is, how do we do it? How is SDX working? And to talk about that, I will pass it on to Tim. Over to you.
Thank you very much, Nitin. So let's carry on with the story as such. So we'll focus a little bit on what SDX is within its portfolio, and then we'll focus also on a little bit more on how we do it. And in that how, I will also show you a short demo of the solution as it exists today. So from a portfolio perspective, SDX, or Sustainability Data Exchange, fits within the zero emissions climate action pillar of the sustainability portfolio. And within that, we are one of the three main applications that are important in our new strategy regarding climate action. So within climate action, we want to move from aggregated averages within regards of carbon calculations and carbon accounting more and more to tracked transactional actuals. And I think there we have three main pillars, or we are one of those three. So we have the carbon data sharing section, which will take care of making sure that you will be able to receive values from your suppliers and that you can also supply values to your buyers. Then we have sustainability footprint management, which is our carbon footprint calculator. And of course, as already talked a lot about on Sapphire, we are going to focus in the next couple of years on developing the green ledger more and more, enabling a way of you to include that transactional accounting on carbon level within your enterprise. If we dive a little bit deeper into the climate action portfolio, we can see that there's a couple of more applications that are included into it that we are connected to. And our main integration will be focused on enriching your carbon footprint calculation in sustainability footprint management. And through the WBCSD standards that we have, we would also be able to connect to third-party calculators as well. So in the end, from that perspective onwards, we are a modular approach from a sustainability perspective that should be able to fit in any enterprise's organization, and actually an application that is small enough to fit within an SME environment as well. In short, what does it look like? So Sustainability Data Exchange focuses on the collaboration of data within your value chain. So as said, you have the ability to request information from your suppliers within the WBCSD Pact standard. And we also have the ability for you to receive those requests from your customers. So we create a supply chain with our application, enabled to connect the whole supply chain together. We standardize the exchange. This is something that we do not just only with the WBCSD with their Pact framework, but also, for example, with the Cantina X environment. So Cantina X is an automotive specific platform, which is currently in construction and which will actually go live soon. And we are the first solution on the sustainability perspective that was certified in that area. So we are compliant to their architecture. So organizations that are a member of Cantina X or that will become a member of Cantina X can use the SDX solution to communicate carbon through the architecture of Cantina X. And we can do that also with other Pact conformant suppliers or software components. So the WBCSD in the end with their Pact framework describes a standard of how to communicate data, how to connect to each other, and what is the data that you actually have to communicate between different organizations. So we are currently also running for conformancy on that section. And then lastly, from an infrastructure perspective, we are also, of course, also working on the connection with the SAP Business Network itself. So SAP itself with its ecosystem would also enable you to communicate with your supply chain partners on sustainability information. And the focus, as said, in that perspective is also that we currently focus on carbon as well, but we aim to expand on different types of messages in the future as well. So it will not keep just to carbon. We will also focus on other types of sustainability information that we want to exchange, but this is purely connected also to the standardization of those topics as we go along. That is sort of in summary of what and where is Sustainability Data Exchange positioned. Now we go a little bit more into how we enable that from that perspective. In a summary of the solution, what we actually try to do is harmonize the exchange of data, enabling that all the data that you receive from your suppliers is interpretable through one single language. And as the WBCSD is rolling this out, this does not mean just the agnostic pact framework itself. Recently, the first industry-specific extension was rolled out. This means that within that construction, also industry-specific communication is possible. And we will roll out these extensions as they get formally approved within the standards as we move along as well. An important part of the solution on top of that is we are trying to focus on, and this is also connected to the Contina X architecture, is data sovereignty. We are not going to store data within central places in platforms. The data remains in an SDX solution, in our solution, and you control who you send it to, and it becomes a peer-to-peer messaging services as such, reaching an SDX or another software component on the other end. As mentioned before, we have or will have the support of industry-specific extensions. So where, for example, RMI, which I mentioned before, has published their first extensions for metals and aluminiums, or steel and aluminiums, a couple of days ago. We expect, for example, the Contina X automotive model also to be officially registered with the WBCSD under their pact framework, meaning that these extensions will be standardized under that data modeling standard, and SDX will support those as well. And then the last part, which Nitin had already alluded on, which is one of the core pillars of the problems we see with Scope 3 information. The first being the ability to actually exchange data, which is solved with SDX and WBCSD as a standard. Standardizing the communication, again, solved with the first data models that are now being standardized and the extensions that are on the way for industry-specific communication. And lastly, we had trust, and that actually focuses a lot on assuring or verifying the data. This is something that will come soon. So here we're dependent on standardization conversations as well, and also on customer requirements on the need for this trust creation. What we at least see is that even though that we can understand and interpret the values that we're now getting, there is still a reason, as mentioned also by Nitin with greenwashing, that we need to make sure that the values are usable, that they are not outliers, or that we can benchmark them, or that potentially we can even ensure that they are not tampered with. This is something that will come later, and this is something that we may want to make sure that will be part of the solution as we and the platform as we go along. From a goal, from a solution perspective, we have the idea of having SDX in the middle of the communication on sustainability. So we want to be able to communicate data interoperably and also without boundaries, so to say. So we want to be able to connect any organization to their suppliers and to their customer, independent of the platform that they are in. So our main focus and strategy, of course, will be the SAP Business Network, but we will not. We will also focus on industry-specific platforms like Contina X and maybe Manufacturing X, as some of you might have heard as well already before, which will start next year, and the TFS platform that Nitin also mentioned before. Our goal is to cover the intake of data as much as possible and have every supplier findable. The WBCSD Pact on its own actually also describes peer-to-peer regular integrations with these with all your suppliers. And even though on short term we will definitely support this, and we will go on making sure that we can enable you those type of integrations as well, this is not something that we see as scalable from an SAP perspective. We would expect that if you have thousands and thousands of suppliers or hundreds of thousands of suppliers, a network facility will be required to be able to go in a scalable fashion and make sure that all the data still becomes usable and obtainable in the end. And as you can see at the bottom on the right here as well, we also have mentioned certifiers and auditors. This is part of this trust creation and assurance creation for those values. So in the future, we would expect, as the standards evolve, that these organizations would also be part of the supply chain, and that data can be requested by them, or certifications, for example, could be requested from them as well. If we go to from here to a basic scenario of what the process will be like that we are going to support, we can basically see it as a multi-tier supply chain, however, with a peer-to-peer communication. So we only will focus on a one level up, one level down principle. So each organization within the supply chain will be able to onboard their suppliers and connect with their customers or their buyers, and handle the communication with either. So in order to be able to run the process of calculating their own carbon footprint, they will have the ability to request data from their shared partners. So they will have a trusted relationship set up with their partners, enables them to request data according to the standards. That organization, of course, will flow through a similar process of where they need to take inventory of their data, possibly also request further upstream data, and run the calculation for their carbon footprint. And then, based on the fact if the data is either available or has now been calculated, you can then share the PCF value with that organization, fulfilling, in that case, that organization's requests. This battery cell producer would then be able to run the process through, run their own calculations, and then also share with the, for in this case, the OEM requesting the data originally. And that, of course, does not necessarily have to stop the supply chain, because this organization in the end could be part of any place within the supply chain. This is the basic request and answer flow that we support. And then on top of that, what we will also have is an update of existing values. So every time your calculator, SFM, for example, runs a new calculation and you update a value, you can proactively update your customers that you have previously shared values with a new version of that PCF value. That's then, of course, Pact compliant again. And then also support the updates of without having a previous request in a more push scenario in that regard. This would then complete the whole end-to-end scenario from a carbon perspective. And then I think what I'll do now is switch to the demo. I will go a little bit through the screens that we have, and I will also explain a little bit of the state of the application and what you may be able to expect within the application within the next couple of releases. And then from that point on, I will hand over back to Nitin for the final set of slides. Let me just switch my screen to my, let me just refresh to be sure, because I probably need to re-enter. No additional security code. So let me close this screen here. So what we're now seeing is the launch page of the SDX app. As you can see, it's a fairly light app, and that is actually by design. As said, it is meant for the smallest of organizations up to the biggest of organizations. We aim to have S4 integrations, for example, for the large enterprises, making sure that we replicate the business partners and the products, but also have the ability for a very small organization to be able to use it. And maintain their materials, for example, manual within the application itself. Again, enable to be enabled to calculate a carbon footprint, you need the information from all your suppliers. And if you take the automotive suppliers as an example, 80% of the suppliers within that supply chain are actually small and medium enterprises. And we need to make sure that onboarding your suppliers is one of the key principles of the platform to succeed. The suppliers in the end will make sure that all the value that you require are going to be there. So at the moment, we are logged in as a company called Charlie within an automotive network. And in that automotive network, I have set up my customers and I have set up my suppliers. Here I can, for example, see within the inventory the products that I have. And in this case, I have a couple of own products that I produce myself. And if I go then into one of these products, I can see the data that is currently maintained for this. So I can already see a status that I have a valid footprint maintained. This could, for example, come from your carbon footprint calculator like SAP Sustainability Footprint Management. And we can see a small view at a glance of the data that is there. Additional, we can see that we have maintained some base technical information of your carbon footprint, which is again compliant in this case to PACT specification version 1. As I mentioned, we are currently in the development of also supporting PACT version 2. So in the backend, we already are that case, and we're currently enhancing the UI so that you can switch, that we have multi-data support, and that you can switch between data models. Already leveraging, for example, the version 3 that most likely will be there next year. And then what you can also see here is the data that is being provided either by the calculator or, as said, if you're a smaller organization, you have calculated somewhere else and maintained manually within the application. One of the key items that you'll see as I'm now in the Charlie environment is that I'm looking at a component that I'm producing myself, as indicated by the check mark, is that I am able to edit that information. That is not the case if you're looking at supplier information, which I'll show you when I switch tenants to a tenant of another organization within the supply chain in a minute. Which means that data that is currently being supplied can only be managed by the data owner. And in that way, we'll want to make sure that, again, data sovereignty remains, and also your supplier can be sure that they cannot edit your data in your own environment, making sure that you use the values as they have been provided to you. From here, I would actually like to show you a little bit the relationship setting. So what we can see here is that we have currently no supplier setup, which is correct because it's the start of the supply chain, so to say. They are as far upstream in the supply chain on onboarding as we go. And we can see that the Charlie company in this case has 2 verified customers or buyers which they can communicate with. And we can see that the status of the exchange is currently sent, which means that we have previously communicated a carbon footprint with them before. This is sort of concluding a base overview of what the app looks like right now. And then from here, I would actually switch to the Charlie company. This is something typically, of course, in an environment of an actual supply chain that would not happen. You would not have access to 2 tenants, but as I'm simulating a supply chain, I will have to switch between a tenant between 2 organizations now. I will make sure to explain when I do that so that we do not lose track of the story. Let me just also refresh this one to be sure to make sure that I don't have to reinitiate my security code. Okay, that's good. So I am now in here as Delta, and Delta is a producer of cars in the end of vehicles. And they have a gasoline car that they produce and a hybrid car that they produce, and they buy a lot more components. We have, of course, filtering capabilities on that to say, I want to see who's the owner of these items. So I want to, in this case, have a look at Charlie, which is the organization that I was looking at in the previous tenant as well within the supply chain. And I can see that I'm having different data that I receive from him already. And I have that data on file. However, I do want to actually request a new carbon footprint because, for example, I want to run a new calculation on the latest information. So if I go back to the Launchpad, I can actually go to my supplier footprint exchange, where I can see all my current suppliers that I have. And as I said before, I want to have a look at Charlie company, and I want to, for example, request the data for the DC to DC converter, which is a component that I require the latest information for to calculate. Maybe one interesting thing, I'm sort of skipping over that, sorry about that. We have the ability here to also switch on a bill of material. This is especially handy to use. Oh, sorry. Especially handy to use in context of, that does not work with the filtering, where I have a lot of components that are being communicated about, and especially in a car when you're talking about thousands and thousands of components, we want to make sure that we understand which components are going to be the core ones to request. So we can see, for example, that we've now sent a couple of requests already and a couple of values have been received. And this is, of course, handy to give an overall overview of all the values that we're going to require as we go along. If we actually go back and switch that off, as I said, I was going to request from the Charlie company the DC to DC converter. And I have the ability to add here a text, please supply new calculation. I can actually send the request. Oh, I made a mistype here as well. And what we also do is we record a full history of all the transactions that have happened before. So all values actually that you have received from your suppliers in the past are all stored in the system, and they are deprecated again according to the standards of the WBCSD pact framework. Every time we receive a new version of a carbon footprint from a supplier, or we receive a new ID altogether, we deprecate the old versions and we only look at the current valid versions. One of the UI enhancements that will actually come soon is the ability to switch between those old versions as well. But at the moment, currently, they're all stored in the backend already. If we, from here, go back to Charlie, so in this case, we should have now a received request, which is correct. I have one pending request that I have now received. And we can have a look and we can see that this is a DC to DC converter. There's a bit of bug here. So we can see that we have received a request for the DC converter, and I see that I have a valid value. So I can actually reply immediately without requiring to answer. And actually, one of the items that we have on the roadmap currently, of course, is to also be able to do that automatically. So to have an auto answer, if you have a valid value within a certain date range, for example, that you will have an auto answer in the future as well. But maybe what we wanted to also have a look at is what happens if we want to update a value. So we go back into the DC to DC converter, which is the product that we want to have a look at, and we want to see if we can edit the value. And we want to propose a new value. So within the pact framework, what we at least want to do is follow a reporting period. So we have here a reporting period of data that we used to accumulate within our own environment of what do we base the calculation on. That can be anything in the past, which is of course what the reporting period is about. We can see that we have a primary percentage, which we, for example, we would calculate and said we made a slight improvement. We now have 78% of the data that we used in our calculation is primary information. And actually our values have improved slightly over time. And according to the V1 specification, as we can see, we can have information as well regarding the cross-sectorial standards, the standard or secondary data that was used within the calculation. And we can also have a look at the geographical information with the spec of version 2, we actually add a lot more fields. We get a lot of data quality indicators, a lot of improvements on the emission factors as well. And as said, those will be part of the UI as well within the next couple of weeks. We have now updated a new value within that item. And then from here, I will go back to my customer requests. And I can actually say, now I would like to supply that latest value to that customer as well. And then I can send the footprint, which updates the latest information, which then if I go back to Delta again, which now has an answer, I can actually go back into my supplier information filter, in this case on Charlie again. And I can see that the status is again received. And I've received a message just a couple of minutes ago from Charlie again with the latest information. With, for example, the updated biogenics that I have updated from 1.1 to 1.0. All right, I think that sort of concludes the demo. And from here, I will go back to my slides, go back to presenter mode, and I will hand over for the last part to Nitin before we go to the question and answer section.
Thank you, Tim. All right, to round it up, this is the status on the commercialization and the go-to-market for SDX. Couple of weeks back, we received the certification from CatenaX, which means all the companies which are part of CatenaX consortium can now use SDX. There are multiple POCs that we are running across the companies from telecom, chemical, automotive, and pharma sector. In fact, a couple of days back, there was a press release that came out from one of the large telecom companies in Europe, talking about the work that they are doing with us. SDX is scheduled to be released commercially on a restrictive mode in a couple of weeks from now. So early Q4 is when we plan to release it commercially. And again, as I think Tim also mentioned during his talk, we understand that not only the large organizations, but also the organizations which are from the small and medium scale customers, we want them to be able to use SDX. So we plan to price SDX very competitively so as to have a wider adoption across all sizes of companies. Next one, please, Tim. So in summary, this was a short brief on why we built SDX, how we built it, and what is the SAP's role in the entire sustainability space. So again, just to summarize it all over again, the reason is because we understand that scope 3 is the largest contributor of any company's product footprint, and that is the value which is hard to get from the customers because it is beyond your own company boundaries, and this is important for your overall meaningful reduction in the carbon footprint of your organization. For that, SDX is a solution which is meant for receiving and sharing your scope 3 product carbon values across your supply chain. And as we saw in the demo a couple of minutes back, we work with the standards like CatenaX or WBCSD pack framework to exchange the data between the organization with interoperability, which means as long as you comply with that standard, you can exchange the data between the partners, between the suppliers and customers. Of course, maintaining the validation and data sovereignty so as to have the easy, scalable and standardized data exchange between the customers and between the companies. Last one, please. And as always, sustainability is a team sport. We look forward to working with our partners, our global alliances. We have been part of multiple industry consortiums, multiple forums, and we believe that this is the right approach to go to the market, so as to have, so as to touch as many players, as many customers across the industries. With that, that was a wrap on the presentation for SDX. We took exactly 40 minutes, and now we are open for the questions.
All right. First of all, thank you very much, Tim. Thank you, Nitin, for the presentation and for the demo. And we have a lot of questions in the chat, and our experts are answering some of them directly, but I will read them all, so giving you a chance to reflect and answer them. So the first question is, data collection challenge if the customer want to use SAP S/4HANA EHS environment management and has CEMS, how this data flow are automated to SAP system if they don't have SAP MII or SAP DMC.
So actually the integrations for EH&S data flows into the sustainability footprint management. So some of the technical details I would need to give to a technical colleague. So I think we can come back to that later. I'm not that technical, to be honest, but SDX itself actually does not integrate with EH&S because EH&S is mostly used for scope 1 and 2 data collection. And that actually goes into the total carbon footprint calculation that is being done by SFM.
Okay, so the next question, is Sustainability Data Exchange is similar to supply chain collaboration application, but focusing on product, corporate, and supply chain carbon footprint?
So the focus for SDX is at the moment solely product level carbon communication. For corporate carbon information, we currently have not received any requirements on needing to communicate that within the supply chain. And actually that is mostly handled within the Sustainability Control Tower, where you do your overall corporate reporting of your corporate carbon footprint, and Sustainability Footprint Management, which is our carbon footprint calculation solution, will focus actually on product carbon footprints and on corporate carbon footprint calculation. So in the end, the data that we help collect with scope 3 will go into those calculations, of course, but the responsibility of reporting and of calculating fall within the other two applications.
All right, thank you. I hope this answered the questions. The next one is, will this SDX solution contribute to EUCBAM as well?
That is the
Yes.
expectation, yes. So one of the trigger points there is, however, that the standards set by the EU, which were only divulged actually a couple of weeks ago, are still very new. So we are going to have to explore that a little bit further. But we have a couple of components within the SAP portfolio that we think that are required to fulfill all the requirements for the carbon border adjustment mechanism, and the part of the exchange of data we expect will fall under Sustainability Data Exchange. However, one of the things that we would need to further discuss also with the EU and potentially with PACT and the WBCSD is the standardization of the data model, because they went in a different direction than the World Business Council at the moment. So yes, we will cover it, but we need to have some look at the standards that are being set in the item set. But the reporting requirement actually will not activate immediately, so we have still time to explore that as we go along.
Right, thank you. The next question, is the peer-to-peer scenario the intended use, or will there be a multi-peer approach possible?
So multi-cent of data will be possible, but each message is transmitted peer-to-peer. So we only communicate from you as an organization to a single customer. The data will not be exposed. For example, competitive information is not going to be exposed at all. However, within the UI experience, you will be able to select multiple organizations or multiple components and request all at the same time, or send all at the same time. And as mentioned in the presentation, we expect automations to be there in the future as well, so that when certain statuses occur, auto requests happen, and also auto answers in batch will happen.
Right, and there is also a connection question. Is this SaaS on premise? And I can also see the answer in the chat from Larissa. So I assume that this question is answered. And the next question is, I'm able to notice the emission factor sources in the application, including Gabi. Is there any standard integration with CIMAPRO, Gabi, and other emission factor applications?
So at the moment, the secondary data is mostly all ingested by the calculator. So we focus on primary information from the suppliers, but we have on our roadmap the potential to have a look at secondary data as well, especially in the scenario where SFM is not included, where we have a third-party calculator. So we might need to be able to do that as well. I believe that SAP has a couple of data providers that they currently already work with. I'm not sure from that perspective if Gabi is one of them. I know EcoInvent, for example, is one of them. The standards as described in the form are all dictated by the WBCSD Pact framework, of course. So those are the standards that they have included in their standards. And those, of course, as long as we move ahead with Pact compliance, we will have to conform to as well.
Right, thank you. The next question is, how will licensing be organized? Will it be sold individually or only together with business network?
Yeah, so we are close to finalizing our commercial offering. SDX is going to be part of the business network, so it would be an add-on component for business network as well. But then we have scenarios where you have industry consortiums like TFS and Katina-X, and the model would be different, where SDX can be licensed standalone by the respective organizations. So more detail to flow in a couple of weeks from now.
All right. The next question is, in the demo system, I see material description, but no material ID. How do you intend to link materials which have the same ID as customer and supplier?
So that is a very good question. So first of all, in the UI, you are correct. The ID is currently not visible, but in the dev system, it is already there. So we're already adding it. So that part is already there. At the moment, the link of that own ERP ID is actually going to be made in SDX. So what we need to understand is the ERP ID of your own organization, and we need to know the network ID of the product that we're connected to. At the moment, the only practical example that we have of that is the Katina-X environment, where at the moment the assumption is that the buying organization would always know the supplier ID. So within Katina-X, we are conforming to that part of the capabilities. As we roll out further to the SAP Business Network, we have to explore how we link those two items together, because as you said, the IDs actually might be the same, but even more frequent, the ID is not going to be the same, and you both need to know that you're talking about the same material. So that's part of that. Within the Pact framework, actually, that is technically solved by identifying in the exchange of the data model what the ID is that you're going to use. So there you, for example, say that it's the buyer assigned ID, or if it's the supplier assigned ID. So standards need to evolve a little bit further on that. As well, to make sure that these things are standardized. But in principle, the aim is that SDX makes sure that they know the link between your own ERP ID and the network ID of the product that you want to communicate about.
Right. Thank you very much. Maybe to those who brought up questions in the chat, a short indication whether your question was answered or not would be very much appreciated. The next question, are there any food companies are going to join SDX?
Food companies, was that the question?
Food, yeah, food companies.
In principle, with WBCSD Pact, we are completely agnostic. So that's very important to understand. We do not look at any industries, and any industry can communicate data based on that standard. However, what we have seen is that industries have very specific requirements. And for example, if you would now go to the catalog website of the WBCSD, you can see that RMI has posted an extension for steel and an extension for aluminium. That is very specific because there are different wishes with these industries, and the extension framework allows for industry-specific communication. The aim is with SDX to support Pact framework and the standards for exchange of data for carbon, but as said, we also think of expanding to other items based on standardization as well. But that means that food companies have the ability today to communicate on Pact conformant data on the Pact framework version 2. And if they wish, they can work on a food specific extension to make sure that it is amended and very specific to their industry as well. And then SDX would be able to support that as well.
Excellent, good to know. The next question is, hi Tim and Nitin, can we have integration with SAP Ariba supplier relationship management?
That is part of the discussion. So
Yeah.
it is not the case yet, but it's part of the conversation.
Yeah.
Right.
So as I said earlier, I think this is, the intent is to have a SDX as an add-on on the business network, and integration with the Ariba is something which is high priority for us right now.
Right. I have feedback from very active participant. It's Henish Shan, and he writes, hi, Tim, thanks for answering all my questions. There is one final technical question. Since SDX deals with sustainability data, is there integration with SAP DataSphere to handle the data in real time?
We actually have looked at that already, at least in the perspective of DataSphere's strong suits are, for example, to download high quantities of data. And that is the secondary data perspective. So if you would like to download the full EcoInvent database, this is where DataSphere would be very strong. Also with their marketplace capabilities, where an organization could get their own subscription to this data perspective. So in that regard, yes, also from potential reporting or data lake perspective, that makes sense. For the exchange itself, at the moment, not, but we're open to explore for further requirements as they come along.
All right, thank you. The next question, I'm not sure whether it's a question or comment, just states roadmap with a question mark, water, waste, pollinator health. So I'm not sure whether the question goes direction SDX solution, or maybe we need some clarification here. So I will move to the next question. Do all suppliers across the supply chain need to be signed up on SAP Business Network?
That will depend on the architecture that we're talking about. So SDX on its own will not deliver the infrastructure to connect. SAP Business Network allows the SAP Business Network to do that. TFS and Cantina X on its own will be responsible for their own onboarding of their suppliers and make sure that they are successful within their own industry. The aim of SDX is to connect to as many infrastructures as possible to give you access to those suppliers. We would, of course, assume that you can find the most of those in the SAP Business Network. Right,
thank you. The next one, are the masters like product, bill of material integrated with SAP ECC, SAP S/4HANA?
That is the goal. So we currently have the ability to upload data in it, and the integration with S4 is currently on the roadmap for beginning of 2024. So we will be able to integrate the S4HANA business partner and material information, and we expect bill of material. As you saw, it's used at least from the UI perspective to reference the relationships of products as well into the solution.
All right. Do we have integration with non-SAP systems for master data?
We have a standardized API from the technical architecture that we use that you could connect the data to as well. Yes.
Right. I have a clarification to the question above with the roadmap. The question is, are there other environmental metrics in the roadmap?
Yes. So we expect water to come at some point. We've already had several conversations with customers, but there we're missing standards. And for example, Cantina X is currently investigating recycled material content, which would enable that for all other industries as well. So there are definitely plans to expand.
Yeah, think about SDX as a mechanism for being able to share the data between organizations in a secure and scalable way. As of now, we are focusing more on the carbon because that's probably the one which has most traction. But we have already had some conversations, some requirement from the market around the other factors as well. As Tim said, I think the industry is still evolving. There are still standards which have to come for this other factors, but as they come, we will be able to use the same infrastructure for sharing those details as well between the organizations.
Right. Thank you very much. The next question is, will it be possible to get also in the chart the evolution during a time frame comparison to previous months to previous year? Kind of comparison values.
I mean, in the end, as said, we are storing all PCF values within the solution itself. So we will have a standard integration into SAP Analytics Cloud, where you can, of course, build your own reporting. And most likely, as SDX will not be a heavy-duty reporting solution on its own, we will have some analytic widgets that we will include where you can see certain trends of specific products. But as said, we would expect the full reporting to be done in SAP Analytics Cloud, or potentially also in Sustainability Control Tower.
Right. Thank you very much. We are almost at the end of the session, so last chance to bring up the questions. First of all, thank you to the audience for being so active and for bringing up so many questions. But we will be also closing this session soon. We don't want to overrun the planned time, but if there anything else that you would like to get answer. One more question. Are there plans to provide demo system or a trial system for partners to play with?
Yeah, so at this point of time, we are looking at a restricted release in Q4, early Q4. So we will be looking at specific, customers, specific partners to work with. We want to start small and then, evolve as the time progresses. So yes, then we will be open for, general availability, and all the partners. We would be able to make the demo system available for all those partners.
Excellent. So I think as there were so many questions, and we might think of offering an update on this topic at some point of time. But I think for now, we had provided a lot of information for the audience, which is helpful.
Yeah. No, thank you, Larissa, and thank you everyone for your valuable time to join the session. I hope you are able to answer most of your questions, if not all. And of course, look forward to working with the partners, with the customers, and we would be happy to share the update, as they happen for SDX. For any further information, please reach out to Tim or myself. You can reach out to us on LinkedIn or on SAP email IDs, and we would be happy to respond. Thank you all.
Right. Also, from my side, thank you, Nitin, thank you, Tim, for this presentation and to answering all the questions from the audience. We had a lot of them. And of course, we will also keep an eye on the updates and we'll be offering an update as soon as the information will be available. With this, I can see in the chat, thank yous. And yeah, valuable session, useful overview, great for this. Thank you for this feedback. With this, I will be closing the session. As I've already indicated, stay tuned. We will be announcing the session that will emerge and hope to welcome you in one of our sessions soon. With this, thank you and bye-bye.
Thank you very much, everybody. Bye-bye.
Bye.